So Joyce scores an 11th round knockout over Joseph Parker. He absolutely flattened him with a left hook after several rounds of just beating Parker up. And despite that, this fight was competitive in spots, especially early on, because as expected by most people, Joyce came out and pretty much insisted on taking the centre of the ring. And Parker didn't look like he was going to challenge Joyce very much, but he seemed like he was looking to time Joyce coming in and had a decent amount of success. Of course, we know that Joseph Parker, very athletic, got good selection of punches that he throws very correctly and with a lot of speed and explosiveness. And so, as many people predicted, he was able to land some very effective and eye-catching offense on Joyce throughout the course of the fight. And it was mostly in the form of body shots especially, but a massive overhand right, which I think I predicted Parker would try and use to good effect. And he was able to land flush on Joyce. But obviously Joyce, nicknamed the Juggernaut, and that's a very appropriate nickname because those punches were just bouncing right off. And whenever Parker was landing one massive shot, one massive haymaker, Joyce was just following up with 2, 3, 4 punches, all heavy punches, sometimes to the head, sometimes to the body, whipping shots over the lead hand of Joseph Parker. And Joseph Parker's nose was busted and bleeding as early as I think the second or third round. And it really looked like the writing was on the wall for Joseph Parker early on, because even though he was getting off his own offense, there was just no damage being done to Joyce. Whereas Parker, he was getting hit with a jab early, he was getting hit with some right hands early, and he was just shipping so much punishment after each of the rounds. After round 1, it looked like he was already feeling the pace where Joyce had come out and looked to stamp his authority on the fight. Into the middle rounds, I feel like this is where Parker potentially got his best work, because he looked like he was maybe settling down somewhat to the pressure. And I think he was able to get Joyce's respect momentarily in a few rounds and just ever so slightly make Joyce relent just a bit, just to slow down the pace at which he was closing the distance. But Joyce, I don't know what was said in the corner, but he was clearly, a fire was lit underneath him slightly, because he came out and he looked to up the pace. And pretty much from, I want to say, round 6 onwards, it was just all Joyce. He came out like an absolute freight train and just looked to stick it on Joseph Parker from the opening bell, the 6th round onwards. And that was really where the fight was lost for Joseph Parker, because by this point he was dog-tired. He was bleeding from his nose. He was cut above his right eyebrow from a left hook, a flush left hook, and it just bust his eye wide open right on impact. And speaking of the left hook, that is actually the punch that finished the fight, because Joseph Parker went to jab with Joyce. Joyce turned over a left hook. It wasn't even on the chin either. It was like on the cheekbone, on the eye. But the flipping Joes, Joseph Parker was just so tired and he'd taken so many punches that he just had nothing. He had nothing left. And he was absolutely slumped. Joyce flattened him and he fell into the corner. And credit to Joseph Parker, because after taking about 3 rounds, or maybe even 4 rounds of just solid punishment where it was so one-sided, he still tried to get up, but was counted out by the referee. And, you know, say what you want about Joseph Parker and his maybe lack of desire to win fights in the past, but he showed immense heart in this fight, because it's one thing to be in a back and forth war where you're hurting the other guy as much as he's hurting you. But in this fight, that wasn't the case, because Joseph Parker was landing and Joyce was just sucking those punches up, and he wouldn't even be steadied for a second. He'd just maintain that forward momentum and carry on coming. And so that's very disheartening, and it just can really break a fighter's spirit when they're loading up with their best punches that land flush and they don't do enough. They don't buy him any time. So Joseph Parker, and he had to deal with that for round after round after round. As I say, from the 6th round onwards, it really just was Joyce. I don't think you can really give Joseph Parker any of the rounds after round 6. He's still got some offense in, as I say, but Joyce was just relentless in those later rounds. For those of you who saw my pre-fight video, I was picking Joyce to win a unanimous decision. And I was thinking maybe Parker can just see out the fight, because he was taking so much damage before that. It looked as if he might just be able to, he might just be numb to it and he might just see out the fight. But no, that left hook pretty much came out of nowhere and just sent Parker onto his back. And that was all she wrote. And so Joyce becomes the first man to stop Joseph Parker, I believe, as full stop. Like, he is the first person to ever stop Joseph Parker. I don't think Parker's been stopped as an amateur or a pro. Certainly not as a pro, but I'm pretty sure as an amateur as well. So that really is a statement. And obviously, this is Joseph Parker, who has lost to Anthony Joshua, lost to Dylan White, had a very close fight with Derek Chisora the first time around. And some people may say that he lost to Hughie Fury. So yeah, this isn't vintage Joseph Parker, but the first man to stop Parker. And nobody's really ever come close to stopping Parker, but the Juggernaut has done it. So I think that's certainly a statement. And was it an impressive performance by Joyce? I'm still standing by what I've said recently, which is I feel like Joyce is maybe stagnating a little bit. For my money, his most impressive performance to date, which I'm sure some people probably disagree with, but that was actually the Bryant Jennings performance. I just felt like from a technical point of view, Joyce showed more, even though he didn't stop Bryant Jennings and was actually hurt in that fight. But nevertheless, Joyce proves once again he's got a legitimate chin. He's got a serious engine and work rate, good shot selection, crushing power, because the damage was just the onset of it was just so early in this fight. And does this mean that he's going to go on to become a world champion and beat everyone in the division? I don't think so, but it's going to be an entertaining ride while it lasts. And yeah, he moves to 15-0 with 14 KOs and has secured his best victory to date. So that is pretty much the fight in a nutshell. Very entertaining fight while it lasted. But yeah, credit to both men, especially Joseph Parker, for showing the amount of heart that he did. And I was kind of joking with the guys who I was watching it with, and I was just saying, you know, going into the 9th round, the 10th round, the 11th round, where Parker was just dog-tired and covered in blood, because this fight was a bloodbath. I was just saying that I think Parker was, the only reason why he hadn't given in yet was because Tyson Fury was ringside and he didn't want to let his bum charm down, because, you know, Tyson Fury, the Gypsy King, he's big on not quitting and stuff like that. And so maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just being facetious, but I suspect that if Tyson Fury wasn't present, maybe Joseph Parker would have come out earlier. Because it looked like in a couple of the rounds that Andy Lee may have pulled him out, because Parker was starting to look quite sorry for himself. His eye was swollen, eye was cut, nose was bleeding, he had blood all over him. And yeah, a brutal fight indeed. And makes you really wonder what Joseph Parker's going to move on to next, because obviously Joyce moves onwards and upwards. Joseph Parker, will he call it a day? You know, he's been a world champion before. He's fought in one unification before. I'm sure he's a millionaire. He's kind of had this new chapter in the past year or so with teaming up with Andy Lee. Is this going to be a big dent to the morale that they've generated over the past 2 Chisora fights? Who knows? But yeah, I'd say definitely check this fight out while you can. These are just my immediate thoughts. Maybe I'll do a follow-up tomorrow or something when I can rewatch the fight. Maybe we get a bit more technical and look at some of the finer aspects of this. But if you want brutality and blood and 2 big men throwing heavy leather at each other, I'm laughing right now because Mrs. Outmatch is shaking her head at that. But yeah, this is the fight to watch if you want blood and guts. But I'll leave it there for this one. If you've seen this fight, what did you think of the performances of both men? Leave it down below and I'll get back to you. But for now, I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for listening.